And it's a foundation built on lies. I think that most of the women who are proponents of abortion, whether they've had abortions or support those who've had abortions, are just fed a lie and they believe it, and they feel like they're doing their duty as good feminists, and they go out and rally for it.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for returning. Thanks for finding us on YouTube, because they're making it almost impossible to do so. So a shout out to my patrons, and a very special thank you also to one of this channel's sponsors, Virtual Shield. You know, if you're not using a VPN by now on your desktop, tablet, or mobile device when you browse the internet, you're really exposing yourself to danger, guys. At some point, you have to get a VPN. But what is a VPN? It's a virtual private network that allows you to create a secure connection to another network over the internet. Check it out. I'll show you how this works. You can see me here on my website, thelibertymill.com. I've already installed Virtual Shield. I just go up to this little icon, the shield up there in the upper right-hand corner. I click it, and then I connect to Virtual Shield. And now you can see that my IP address says that it's coming from Chicago, Illinois. Virtual Shield has changed my IP address to one coming out of Illinois. I don't live anywhere near Illinois. So that's how a VPN works. Very simple to do. Go to virtualshield.com and download the free 30-day trial and install it. Then just click connect like I just showed you. This month, Virtual Shield is offering a 4th of July celebration special of 20% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons and VIP performance plans for as low as $3 a month. So sign up for your free 30-day trial. Protect your personal data now with a VPN. Try Virtual Shield. I'll leave the link below this video. I think this broadcast is really going to move you. It's one you're going to want to share with friends and family. I've got goosebumps as I say that. It's absolutely true. I've got some very special guests on the line right now. Before I introduce them, though, I want to celebrate the fact that good things are happening. It's happening, folks. What Q has said is starting to unfold. We are now seeing high-level perp walks with the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein in New York on Saturday, July 6th. Jeffrey Epstein now faces 45 years in prison. And if you don't think he holds the keys to the castle, stay tuned, because this guy can name the names, and I think he's probably got videotape of these people from Little St. James Island in the Lolita Express, upon which Bill Clinton flew more than 20 times, and Hillary Clinton flew 5 or 6 times. Well, stay tuned. It is one of the biggest stories of the year, but one of the biggest stories of the century. The abortion on demand signed into law in New York on January 22nd by Governor Cuomo, allowing abortion in the 9th month. That piece of legislation is called the Reproductive Health Act. Well, that's counterintuitive, isn't it? Reproductive health, abortion. We're going to talk about all of it today with my good friend, Dr. B. She's a doctor of pathology. Dr. H. She's an OBGYN. And Dr. M. a critical care anesthesiologist. And these folks have great insight into abortion. And we're going to talk about all of it today. First, Dr. B, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back, Dr. B.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me back, Sean. It's a real pleasure. And I'm really glad that I got to bring my friends along with me for this important discussion.
Well, me too, because, you know, when you and I last talked, you said you had no idea when you were going to be studying to become a doctor of pathology that it would require you to deal with aborted baby parts. You had a great awakening, and I think that's happened with some of your friends. So thank you so much for bringing them on. Dr. H, the OBGYN, thanks for coming on.
Yes, thank you, Sean, for having us. I think this is such an important topic, and something I feel very passionate about, just caring for women for more than a decade now, and witnessing, I think, a lot of the other end of abortion, and a lot of women who, you know, they don't get appropriate counseling before seeking out an abortion, and then, you know, years later, even they're dealing with regret and anxiety. I've had patients have breakdowns in the office, and so just I think this is something that deserves a lot of very specific attention that women they're not aware of it.
Yeah, they certainly aren't aware of it, especially if all they get is the propaganda from CNN and the mainstream media news. You mentioned something very interesting there. You used the phrase caring for women. What we hear in these abortion on demand marches is abortion is health care. I'm going to play a clip for you all in a second, but let's talk to Dr. M. Dr. M, you're the critical care doctor. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. I am so happy that you've invited me to your show. I've been listening for a while, and it's such a great pleasure to be able to speak to my experience with abortion. I have a unique experience as both a physician and someone who's had an abortion. And although it's been several decades, it's still I'm going to be happy to talk about what that experience was like. And then also, after becoming a physician, the nuanced and not so nuanced ways that medicine destroys life.
Wow.
Yes.
Let me ask you, that's an interesting statement. Can you repeat that? Did you just say in the interesting ways that medicine destroys life?
Yes. So
Yeah.
not everything is overt as let's have an abortion. That's very clear that there's a woman that's pregnant and we know that the woman is pregnant and we're ending that life. But there are other situations where life exists, or we don't know that life exists and we don't care that life exists or may exist. So I whenever you want me to expand on that would be perfectly fine.
Well, it is interesting because it's counterintuitive to hear that medicine destroys life, but I do believe that Western medicine in many ways does damage people and can damage people. Now, if I was in a car accident and I needed surgery on my arm because I had a compound fracture, of course, I would want the best surgeon in Western medicine to do that procedure. But there are many other things that are damaging when we talk about Western medicine. Let me do this, guys. Let's just level set, because what we hear coming from the mainstream media and these pro-choice marches are terms like abortion is healthcare, a woman's choice, pro-life laws are a war on women, and Chuck Schumer, who you're going to hear from in a minute, talking about a woman's fundamental rights. Let me play this clip from France 24, and then I just want your guys' reaction, because to me this is such hardcore propaganda that it's brainwashing women and girls across the country and across the world.
It is.
And I think it's a eugenics operation. Of course, that's the way it started with Margaret Sanger over there at Planned Parenthood. And then I'll play a clip from Bill Gates. I'm not sure if you guys knew this, but Bill Gates' dad was once the head of Planned Parenthood. Bill Gates, the proud eugenicist that he is. But let's just frame it up with this clip from France 24, talking about some of the pro-choice marches across the United States recently.
From North Carolina to California, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, and all the way to the Supreme Court. Abortion rights activists held a day of action on Tuesday to protest the Republican-led campaign to outlaw the procedure. They were joined by lawyers, health professionals, and politicians.
Republican legislatures are waging a war to unravel a woman's fundamental rights. They are responsible for 300 newly proposed restrictions. We are here to send these folks a message, not on our watch.
I'll stop it there. That was Chuck Schumer, a woman's fundamental rights. As a man, some women would say, I have no business talking about this topic. So I'm glad to have on three highly intelligent, educated women, doctors, in fact, to help us tackle this. Who would like to speak first about what Chuck Schumer just said there? A woman's fundamental rights. How does abortion fit into a woman's fundamental rights?
It doesn't. I'll just be flat out. It does not. There is no such thing as a right to murder or harm another person. And anyone who's ever been a fetus has the right to talk about this topic.
Was that which doc was that?
That was Dr. M.
Dr. M. Okay. Sorry, ladies. I'll figure this out as we go.
That's okay.
Can you tackle that for me? Because we're being told, and we're told constantly, that inside the womb is nothing but a lump of cells, but people aren't buying that. I think there's a great awakening happening, and even those that were formerly hardcore pro-choice, many people are waking up to the fact that in the 9th month, there's no debating that that's a real human being. What game are they playing that would allow them to pass into law 9th month abortion on demand in New York?
Convenience. It's convenient, whether it's convenient for the act to happen, convenient to set definitions, convenient for personal gain. It's just a game of convenience and selfishness.
I think there's also a darker spiritual battle behind it too. I think, as Justice Kavanaugh comes on, as more of Trump's Supreme Court appointees will start to join the Supreme Court, it's a battle over Roe versus Wade. And I think they're gearing up. I think they're terrified. And I think that their sacrifices to Moloch they're terrified that it's drying up. So states are drawing a line in the sand and falling on good versus evil when it comes to this.
And it's a foundation built on lies. I think that most of the women who are proponents of abortion, whether they've had abortions or support those who've had abortions, are just fed a lie and they believe it, and they feel like they're doing their duty as good feminists, and they go out and rally for it. But it's physicians like Dr. H who really see the immediate effects, and then Dr. B who see the after effects. And then I have my own story as Dr. M, but I'll let
Dr. M, I think it's actually a good segue to get into as why your voice here is such a unique one about when you had your abortion, what you were fed when you were learning about it, and then later in medical school. If you could go on and
Sure.
sort of explain your story, I think it gives it a good segue.
Yes. So I was very young. I was 17. I was a good Catholic girl, except for I had a boyfriend, and I was sexually active, and found myself pregnant in the spring of my senior year in high school, and I had my whole future in front of me, and I was embarrassed, and my school did not allow unwed mothers, and my parents, I knew, would have been very upset. And I confided into a family friend who said, there's a clinic in a particular city in the Midwest, and you should give them a call. And so I did, and it was arranged, and it costs about $250. And I went up with a check or not a check. I went up with some cash. They asked no questions. They didn't require any parental consent. And then it happened, and that was it. And for a very long period after that, I was very depressed. I immediately regretted what had happened. And then as a few years later, I ended up having cancer, which clearly you and I know that that's not related in any way. But I always felt like that was a punishment, and just very hard on myself, kind of just blanket veil of depression. In my mid-20s, I found who was very forgiving and opened me up to a part of the Catholic Church that was welcoming women who'd had abortions before. And I spent many weekends with her talking about my experiences, and it was very helpful. But I was a latecomer to medicine, so I didn't go to medical school until I was in my 30s. And I mean, even until then, I kind of had I'm against abortion, but in some cases it's probably okay, whatever, rape, incest, that sort of thing. And then in medical school, actually doing pathology, with the courses in pathology and anatomy and actually cadaver work and so on, going through my rotations in OB-GYN, and then having a baby myself during medical school who was premature, several weeks premature, 7 weeks premature, and realizing that this child could have been somebody else could have decided they didn't want a premature child who was at risk for disability and decided to abort this child. And it was just so heartbreaking. And that's when I just full stop became against it. So that's kind of my segue into the full change in my experience. But what was really interesting as a 17-year-old in the mid-90s, there was it was when I walked into the Planned Parenthood, it was a celebrated thing. It was like, oh, we're happy you're here. We're going to take good care of you. This is the best decision for you. There was no, have you had any counseling? Do you know what this is about? Do you know what can happen as a result of this procedure to your future fertility? Nothing like that. It was just, here's your money. Thank you. We're glad you're here. Let's get you into a room. And it was just very cold and kind of, I don't know. It just was, it's funny when I see television shows or movies that depict alien abductions and they're doing those experiments. That's kind of how I equate my memory to that procedure.
Wow.
Let me jump in though and ask something here. Dr. H, you, I think as I was reading a bit about you and your story via Dr. B, you believe that God is moving doctors, and in your case, in your experience, even some patients to maybe have spiritual awakenings. A lot of people that have had abortions have deep regret and depression about those abortions. And let's talk a little bit about the spiritual awakening that you've had, because I don't think many people, if you're a young listener right now and you're thinking about going to medical school and you're a Christian and you're pro-life, I don't think people realize that as a training OBGYN or even a doctor of pathology, you might be forced in medical school to do an abortion. Even against your will, you may be coerced into, via peer pressure, to perform an abortion. I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So as part of my training in medical school, I definitely identified early on that I did I felt a calling to do women's healthcare and to go into OBGYN. And as part of my rotation, you're kind of looking through your electives and you're trying to, narrow down your focus and take classes or courses that have more clinical relevance to what you're going to pursue. And for me, I saw this elective for, family planning, and this sounds great. Like, this is definitely going to be an inherent part of women's healthcare, but I feel like even the title of that is just so misleading. And as a medical student, I had no idea what I was even getting involved in this rotation. And suddenly here I am finding myself, going out to Planned Parenthood and just walking through the entire process of an abortion. And I'm thinking, even then I'm going, this doesn't make sense. This is not family planning at all. This is like termination of your family. This is, and so the whole way that it's just labeled, the way that it's presented, I think is a deception. It's just misrepresented. And I think kind of going back to Dr. M's story too, there's so many of my patients that, flash forward years later have had similar experiences. They walk in and there's no discussion of what the follow-up for that procedure is going to be. I mean, if I do a medical procedure on a patient and I'm consenting her for surgery, for example, a tubal ligation, one of the risks that we'll consent patients for is the risk for regret. And you would think, in this particular case, especially, that women would be counseled about the fact that there may be regret, there may be shame, there may be guilt, fear. I think a lot of women kind of come into this situation, they find themselves pregnant and not wanting to be, and there's not enough support. I think there's not enough out there just offering alternatives to women that are safe alternatives, that are based out of love and support and nurturing of their pregnancy. And so I think Dr. M's story of just having that depression that followed up immediately after, I've seen that so many times. And I just remember as a medical student going back to my training, I vividly recall at the end of my day, I was horrified just seeing parts of fetuses. And at the end of the procedure, what we do is actually we float the specimen in saline so that we can look at all the pieces and make sure that we haven't missed any parts. And I'm looking at these babies that have been torn limb from limb, and you're just putting them back together. And it was bizarre. I didn't understand how that had any place in medicine. And at the end of the day, I'm just kind of leaving. And the woman who was running that particular Planned Parenthood pulled me aside and was just congratulating me for being someone that just quote unquote gets it. And I'm thinking, what is there to get? I had no comprehension, no understanding even then. And just flashing forward, going into my specific training residency, there were definitely times where as a resident, the system is set up where, you have an attending physician, you have a hierarchy. It's almost like the military. And so as an intern coming in my first year, you just kind of do what you're told. You don't really question what is presented, to you. If you're told this is what you're going to do, you just do it. And so I remember as an intern very vividly, there was a younger patient. She was coming in, I think it was her third or fourth termination. And I was standing there in the OR with my attending, and he kind of turned to me and handed me the suction cannula and is telling me, well, you're gonna perform this termination. And I had this horrible feeling. My heart is racing. I don't want to do this, but it's like I didn't feel like I could turn to my superior, to my attending, and tell him, I don't feel comfortable doing this. I think you could read my body language at the time. And so he actually started to chide me and kind of just, oh, come on, you're not going to be one of those, are you? That, you're not going to offer this woman what she needs, and you're going to inflect your personal beliefs on this person's choice. And he's like, come on. And so, he ended up talking me into doing it. And to this day, that is the one and only termination that I've ever performed. And I still regret it deeply, 15 years later.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Well, that's spiritual warfare right there. These people are engaging. Yes. Look, if you are a doctor who's pro-life and you're a Christian, mm-hmm. under no mm-hmm. circumstances should you be required or chided into performing an abortion mm-hmm. as part of your quote-unquote mm-hmm. training. So I just mm-hmm. want to back up. You said you had to spend a full day, maybe it was more than a day, at a Planned Parenthood. When I've walked by those things, I know where there's a couple of them in the city where I live, and they're very third world looking to me from the outside. They're not mm-hmm. well maintained. There's no windows.
Mm-hmm.
Describe the spirit. What is it like to be in a place like that all day? Because to me, it's just got to be one of the most negative places on earth, and I cannot imagine how anybody would want to get paid to go abort babies as their job mm-hmm. every single day.
I mean, for me personally, walking in, I felt this sense of anxiety coming over myself, and not even feeling certain of why that was coming over me. But there's protesters out front, and I went away, and it was very surreal coming in, because you're entering kind of literally, and it was kind of almost prophetic. You're coming through this back door to avoid being seen, and you're kind of under this cover of darkness. It really, truly, looking back now, was a very prophetic experience. And yes, the rooms were just kind of, dimly lit, not a lot of windows, obviously. There's a counseling, quote unquote, counseling booth in the beginning, which basically consists of giving the patient a stack of paper, which is consent forms that they just sign. They're not really walked through them in any kind of meaningful way, from my experience. And then the patient is just brought back to the procedure. She's sedated. I witnessed patients that, they're sedated, but they're not completely out. And there are women who are experiencing pain during the procedure. They're squirming with their legs up, in the stirrups. And you're seeing, a lot of blood, a lot of material being taken out. I think that's another, it's a deception that's spoken that, an abortion is not without risk. A lot of women think, oh, well, being pregnant is high risk and an abortion is much safer. But I've seen women hemorrhage. I had a patient, my own patient personally, who had, without calling me, went ahead and had a termination. And I later had to admit her to the hospital with a severe infection requiring IV antibiotics. She was having, a hemorrhage issue. And not only that, but she was also Rh negative. And so this is like an OBGYN 101. If you have a miscarriage or a termination and your blood type is Rh negative, you need to be given Rogam. Otherwise, your body can form antibodies to the baby's blood, and the next time you conceive, your body will actually attack that fetus, and the baby can end up with heart failure and severe anemia, and it can be lethal. And so obviously this is very important. This should never be missed. But this particular patient went to Planned Parenthood and was sent home with no Rogam, incomplete evacuation of the tissue, and ended up admitted to my hospital with an infection. And we were worried about her uterus, the safety of her future fertility at 22 years old. And, she did okay ultimately, and we sent her home after a couple of days inpatient. But I have a real concern as to whether she's going to have scar tissue, in her cavity, in her tubes, that may impact her fertility in the future.
Well, guys, let me do this. In the interest of just talking about, I think, double speak, right? It's very Orwellian what we're up against. in this society and around the globe, right? Sovereignty, bad. Borders, bad. Speech, free speech, bad. Pro-life, bad. I want to play this clip from Bill Gates because I think it speaks to the larger agenda of abortion. And this is Bill Gates. I've played this many times before. In February of 2010, speaking at a TED Talk, I want to play this clip briefly, and then I want your guys' thoughts on what he says here, because I think it's quite puzzling. He's talking about healthcare. Well, listen to this.
First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
I'm going to pause it right there. I'll play it again if you want me to, but I think you guys can read between the lines, and any educated audience can. I'm not sure that the TED Talk people caught it, but he's basically saying if we do a good job on reproductive health, that's abortions, isn't it? Isn't that access to abortion? And how about the vaccines comment? That's a puzzler. Your thoughts on Bill Gates. Is abortion at its heart nothing more than a eugenics program?
I think so.
How could it be anything else?
I think it is. I think that it's still. I think it's also the spiritual battle, the dark spiritual battle of sacrificing a Moloch behind it too, but very much seen as a eugenics program. Mm-hmm. And the doublespeak behind pro-choice versus pro-life. I mean, pro-choice is a euphemism, or the fact that it's women's rights. It's not the right of that little girl fetus in a mother's womb. What about her rights? It's not women's rights. It's a human right issue, a right for the most innocent of our society being protected. And so the euphemism, I mean, Sean, when we talked a while back, I told you how I sort of came out of brainwashed liberalism, but I always struggled with the thought of abortion. With it just really seems they're applying a euphemism to it. I always really struggled with that.
Well, it's interesting to hear Bill Gates talk about the problem of population.
And it's at that time when the
problem with overpopulation. And he literally says if we do a really good job with vaccines and reproductive health, we might be able to reduce that number by 10 or 15%.
Which reminds me of the Kenyan. Did you see the Tdap vaccines in Kenya that were done? They were boosters. They were giving them to the young women. I think it was the Catholic. There was a good article a while back about the Catholic doctors that had discovered that there was beta HCG within the Tdap vaccines, and that they were only giving it to young women. And beta HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, that's what's released. The placenta makes that to allow implantation to occur and to allow the placenta to grow. So the fact that it's being induced or being injected in somebody's body to cause antibodies to form against it, they were showing those Kenyan doctors were showing that it was a form of sterilization that was not told to those patients.
Yeah, and Bill Gates is pleased with that because that's all part of the program. Again, his father was once the head of Planned Parenthood. I mean, Our audience knows this stuff. You guys know this stuff, but it's shocking to see people on the left wearing these pink pussy hats marching for abortion on demand rights, and they get so militant about their beliefs. I guess at the end of the day, one wonders, and I've asked this question many times, why are so many people on the left so myopic and intellectually dishonest, right? Why can't they wake up? Why can't they recognize that there is a life inside of a woman that they're choosing to end? Why do they have to go to the side of, it's just a lump of cells? It's because if they embraced the truth, they wouldn't be able to sleep at night, which really brings me full circle to my question for you guys, each of you who are highly educated doctors. How does a doctor, and I guess you don't have to be a doctor to perform an abortion anymore, how does a person choose to do this for a living? Perform abortions every single day. I don't understand it. And I really don't understand why the left is so intellectually dishonest that they can't stand up for our country. They can't stand up for free speech. They can't stand up for life inside of the womb. They can't stand up for, what can they stand up for? What do Democrats have to offer the American people at this point?
think I think a lot of it has to do with programming, with, and Jesus had said that right is wrong, right will be thought wrong, and wrong will be thought right, if I'm getting that correctly. At least I believe it was Jesus. But I think that's where we are right now, where there's so much programming within our schools, within our media, that it's falsely dividing people into paradigms to where we fight each other instead of fighting the true issues. And people just get programmed to believe talking points and to fight for those. Now, somebody actually being confronted with those ripped up pieces of those little fetuses, of those little babies, and still seeing it and thinking that they're fighting for good, I can't explain that. But I can talk about, my co-residents, when I would receive during training, when I would receive the buckets of those baby parts in their own blood, and I just broke down into tears. But like Dr. H talked about how she had to see all the parts were there, that would be what they wanted us to do too, is I guess a double check on, I'm not sure, but I had co-residents calling them baby puzzles, because you basically put the pieces back together, and then they'd go and they'd march with their pink hats on. And I can't explain it.
I think there's a disconnect in a lot of things that in medicine we're asked to do in general, where, you're looking at an emergent situation, or you're looking at a difficult situation, and you have to put your emotions aside to deal with the issue at hand. And I think that is the only possible scenario that I think allows people to perform an abortion, would be to just, you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're literally just going through the motions and not facing the truth of what you're looking at or what you're seeing. And, I had a moment, this is kind of a little bit different, but, when we do our cadaveric dissections, when we're learning anatomy, and, you delve in, and you have a human body, and you're dismembering, you're taking pieces out, you're evaluating it, and it's all for the point of learning. And this is obviously a body that's passed away of natural causes. But then when you pause for a minute and you look at what you're doing, and you're kind of taking a body apart, there's just this moment of, oh my gosh, this is kind of disturbing when you look at what you're doing. But I think that we tend to disconnect, and I think it has a lot to do with programming and just trying to refuse to acknowledge truth or face what we're looking at in that sense. And my personal belief, I think a lot of this it's a war on women. I think that this is not, there's a lot of women who are standing up and saying, well, I'm a feminist, hear me roar. And I'm here to stand beside my sisters and to, to wage war against the system, and to say that we're worthwhile and we're valued. But I think my personal belief, my personal, faith-based view on that is that this is all a huge deception that is staged by the enemy. Because when you look at God's design for women, we are givers of life, we are bringers of life. And the enemy he recognizes that, women were the first experience of love for any child that's born, and that's powerful, to be a reflection of Christ in your home, to be a reflection of Christ over your children. And so I feel that the enemy is just angry at that, has been trying to tackle women, bring women down since Eve, since the beginning of time. And so I feel like this is just it's a strategic distraction by the enemy to, it says, that Satan will come as an angel of light. And so I think that people are focusing on, nobody's going to willfully follow Satan and just think, oh yeah, I'm the follower of Satan. But he comes as an angel of light, and he sells just enough truth with a lie to make the lie believable. And so what's happening is that women out there are feeling that they're empowered by this feminist movement, but truly they're breaking down the structure that is God ordained, God given, over what our bodies are capable of doing and doing, just to grow a human being. And the enemy is coming against it in a way that, you're appealing to a fleshly desire of self-worth and self-value, but we're losing sight of what our God-given value is.
You know what? You just nailed it. And Dr. B or Dr. M, you guys, either of you can respond to that, but let me just share something. The New York legislation that was signed by Cuomo back in January was called the Reproductive Health Act. Then they lit the spire atop the World Trade Center pink in celebration of this horrible anti-life bill. And Dr. H, you just said something really interesting. You called this a war on women. Well, that France 24 clip that I played of the pro-choice marchers at the beginning of our interview here, one of those signs said, pro-life laws are a war on women. So again, speaks to the doublespeak in propaganda, which is truly satanic in nature, that is at the heart of the pro-choice movement. And that's what they don't want people to realize. They really, if you can break down language, if you can break down truth, if you can make black white and evil good, then you can win the souls and the minds. You can win the hearts, minds, and souls of the people that will fall for it. But more and more people are waking up to the truth. I swear, there is a spiritual awakening sweeping this country, and it terrifies the left.
100%.
That was so well said, Dr. H. When you talked about war on women, back when I first talked to Sean and talked about my testimony, I talked about when I was learning all of this, and my jaw just dropped as I learned the true origins of the women's liberation movement, with how it was planned by the Rockefellers, how Nicholas Rockefeller had told his friend Aaron Russo, who he was trying to recruit to the Council of Foreign Relations, that the Rockefellers engineered it all, that Gloria Steinem, we now know about her connections to the CIA, but this was done. Their agenda was really to destroy the family, was to get women who were raising kids out of the home, because half the population wasn't being taxed into their central banking system, which is just a debt enslavement system that's been put on us since 1913. So they wanted more women to come out so they could tax them. But then when they're not raising their children, the other objective was to get our kids out from under being raised by their families, being raised by their parents, and raised by the state, where they could further indoctrinate them and teach socialism and teach that right is wrong and wrong is right, and that this is really women's empowerment, when it's not. It's the opposite of it. And
exactly right.
It brings me to another thought of, I don't want anyone listening out there to think that I'm judging them for having had an abortion, or that's not where I'm coming from on this. I want to expose the satanic system that's behind enslaving us through debt, making us desperate, making us not be able to raise families and raise children, to where we're always working, to where it's so stressful that this is the easy way out for many people who feel trapped. And I think it's all done on purpose. I think it really is a satanic agenda. And just my personal experience with I got pregnant accidentally in med school, and I was married at the time, but I remember my parents, my father was in med school when my mom got pregnant, and she thought she was going to be a career woman. This was right during heavy women's liberation, the movement, and she didn't want to have kids, and really honestly, she was also worried about, she wasn't married yet, and she was worried that she would look 6 months pregnant going down the aisle for her wedding. And so she fell for all the propaganda that they put. She bought that it was just a blob of tissue. And I lost my older sibling to abortion. So when I got pregnant in medical school, I'm my first night, I was going, oh, what am I going to do? And I'm in a good position and financially. I'm not going through what a lot of desperate, poor women out there are struggling with, these awful, awful decisions. I can't imagine what it must be like. It was hard enough for me, but I wasn't at my wit's end. But I remember thinking, how am I going to finish medical school? How am I going to get through residency? How am I going to do this? And the thought popped briefly in my head. And then I remembered my mom and my dad, who had admitted this to me and said it was the biggest mistake they ever made. And that they told me, my dad said, please, this was earlier, he didn't know I was pregnant yet, but he was like, don't ever have an abortion. And this was when I was spouting social liberal just sayings as going through high school and then college, when you get really brainwashed into all of this. And I still always remembered my parents' experience, and they didn't get it until they had their first child a year later. And as soon as my mom had my sibling, it flooded her. It hit her what she had done and what had happened. And because of that experience, it stopped me. And then I have a little 6-month-old baby when I got into my residency, and I was confronted with these buckets of baby parts and their own blood ripped up while they're still alive. And it just floored with how they're deceiving our whole population, how they're creating this desperation for so many humans out there, and how they're just encouraging it, and how they're brainwashing us with doublespeak. And it's so wrong. Someone's got to do something. So I'm so glad you guys came on to tell your stories too and your personal experiences with this.
Doctor,
this is Dr. M.
Yeah, good. I wanted to hear from you next, because I'm sure you have something very important to say to women who have had an abortion or are thinking about having one. And I just think that what needs to be said about this before we hear from you, and you help round out this discussion, is that the people, the controllers of this world, the ones that Dr. B sort of alluded to there, the controllers of this world that Nick Rockefeller, certainly the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vatican, the people that control this world view humanity they view people as commodities. That's why in corporations we have departments of human resources. A resource is expendable and easily renewable. They don't care about the fragility of individual life. That's why Bill Gates can talk about overpopulation and basically say with vaccines and reproductive health services, we can thin the herd. He doesn't care about the individual. They don't see us as loving, fragile human beings created in God's eye, created in God's image. They see us as expendable commodities. And I think that's what's been sold to humanity, and people are starting to reject it. And the quickest, best way to reject it, guys, well, I don't want to proselytize, so I won't, but the quickest way to see the truth is to see the biblical truth that we are all created in God's image. We are all special, and we all have a purpose and place in this world, but the controllers don't want you to know that. So Dr. M, please take it away, whatever you want to say, but I know you're probably very passionate about women who have had abortions or are thinking about having one.
Yes, very much so. The message I have for women who are pregnant and are desperate and are considering abortion, I don't know, just being on this radio show, I don't know anybody's background, and I don't know anybody's story, but murder is not the way, and it is murder. And I've had to come to grips with that being what it is. And that's not a judgment against the person who's contemplating this, but just to know the gravity of the decision, and having been through that, it will stay with you. And honestly, to the person who is listening to this, thinking about abortion, scared, you're loved. You are loved. And there are people in this world who will help you. And you don't have to do what others expect you to do. And you're brave, and you're amazing. And you can do this. You can be a mother. You could let someone else be a mother, but you can save lives. And this is an amazing thing to do. But aside from that, I also wanted to comment on the back of what Dr. H had to say about the disconnect, that you had the question of, Sean, of how do people do this? How do abortionists continue doing this? And disconnect is one thing, but there's also this idea of desensitization. So in my field as an anesthesiologist and critical care physician, I see the sickest patients. I see the patients that have had terrible traumas. I see the patients who have been shot multiple times. Their limbs are torn from them. Their faces are falling off. I mean, you name it, I've seen it, and I've had to provide anesthesia for it. And after a few years of seeing this, it doesn't shock you anymore. And these people who provide abortions, part of me wants to believe that when they start doing it, they have some sort of conscience and know that it's wrong. Then they keep doing it, and over time, they just don't think it's wrong anymore, and it becomes a desensitization type situation. They've disconnected and they've desensitized, and then they've bought in. And that's such a sad event. And I think that that's what's happening. And I agree with Dr. B that it all goes back to feed into this evil force that's driving this. It's just horrible. And it's not just for the purposes of population control. It's for purposes of organ harvesting or tissue harvesting. There's money to be made in fetal tissue. There's money to be made in fetal organs. And it's not just fetuses that the pro-choice group thinks are not worthy of life. So it's just a terrible, terrible thing. I don't even know how to put it into words sometimes. And it's also not just overtly abortion, as I was saying before. I've noticed insidious creeping of, I guess, subversive abortion. So, we have women who are childbearing age who show up to the hospital because maybe they need an appendix out, or maybe they have a broken leg and they need anesthesia. And every so often there's these adjustments of pregnancy test rules. And do we need to test every woman of childbearing age? Oh, we'll just have them sign a waiver if they don't want to do it. Well, a lot of these women could be pregnant. And I over the years, I've had to break the news to some women that, hey, you're pregnant. Do you want to have this procedure today? And it's most of the time a joy. But I have no doubt that there are lives lost because women choose not to be pregnant, or the rules state that we don't have to test these women and they're pregnant, and because of the procedure or the anesthetic, they've lost the baby. Or when you have a woman who, say, is 19, 20 weeks pregnant, and Dr. H could probably talk about this as well, we don't even bother monitoring that baby during a procedure because they're not, quote, viable. So if the baby is lost in the middle of a procedure, that's too bad.
Well, you can speak to that. Yeah, whoever wants to speak to that can. It just, I think as I listen to you speak, it makes us all realize that even though we're told in these pro-choice marches with these signs that abortion is healthcare, that's what the left says, that's what the pro-choicers say, abortion is healthcare. The truth of the matter is abortion is business. It's big business.
It's big business. It's big business not only for the population control, but as I said before, there are upcoming medical research that utilizes fetal tissue and fetal cells. America is not the only country in the world that does healthcare research and medical research. It's just a worldwide phenomenon.
Well, why don't we do this in the interest of time, and I would be more than happy to get you guys on again anytime. But let's just round out the conversation with the spiritual good news for anybody listening, whether you've had an abortion or not. And I'll quote Colossians here. This is chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Anybody listening to this, it's very easy to be forgiven for any wrongdoing you've done in your life. Fall on your knees and just ask the Lord Jesus Christ for forgiveness. It's that easy. Yes, you're going to have to humble yourself. That's number one. Number two is asking for forgiveness, and your sins can be forgiven. Final word from Dr. B, Dr. H, and Dr. M. Who wants to go first?
I'll go ahead and say, Sean, I was just going to echo the same thing, that, if you're someone who has suffered through an abortion, or you're struggling with, regret or anger, grief, shame, and that place of struggle is met and answered by this beautiful truth of grace upon grace, and this knowledge that our past is purchased by the blood of Jesus, and he's paid it all so that we can be set free. And so just to, like you said, asking for forgiveness, asking for him to be in your life, and he's paid all of that grief and pain and shame and taken it from you. So just no one needs to live with that or to move forward in life with anything from their past that's holding them.
Agree. This is Dr. M. Agree. I can't emphasize enough how much Christ has been my savior in the experiences that I've had with abortion. And honestly, if anybody out there is feeling lost or wants to know more about my story as it relates to them, they can get a hold of you, Sean, and you can contact me. But I'm always there for any woman who is going through this.
That's very generous. Absolutely. I will get anyone in touch with you that requests so. And I want to thank you all so very much. We'll hear from Dr. B last. Dr. B, it's ironic. You're the first whistleblower doctor I've ever had on, and now I have 2 more friends, and I'm so glad that you guys came on. So, Dr. B, thanks for introducing us to Dr. H and Dr. M. I want to thank you both for coming on and being so brave to speak out. I know it's dangerous. We live in a time where there's nearly universal deceit, and speaking the truth is, of course, a revolutionary act. So, Dr. B, final word from you. And again, thanks so much for bringing us all together today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Sean. I really did enjoy this so much. And as you were talking, I felt the urging in my spirit to look up Romans 8, verses 18 through 28. I hope it's okay if I can read this, because I think they're very lovely, and I think it pertains to what we're going through, and hopefully it resonates with people. So it starts out, this is the Passion Translation that I have up. It's Romans 8:18, a glorious destiny. I am convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled within us. The entire universe is standing on tiptoe, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. For against its will, the universe itself has had to endure the empty futility resulting from the consequences of human sin. But now, with eager expectation, all creation longs for freedom from its slavery to decay, and to experience with us the wonderful freedom coming to God's children. To this day, we are aware of the universal agony and groaning of creation, as if it were in the contractions of labor for childbirth. And it's not just creation. We who have already experienced the first fruits of the Spirit also inwardly groan as we passionately long to experience our full status as God's sons and daughters, including our physical bodies being transformed. For this is the hope of our salvation. But hope means that we must trust and wait for what is still unseen. For why would we need to hope for something we already have? So because our hope is set on what is yet to be seen, we patiently keep on waiting for its fulfillment. So I'll switch to 27, verse 27. God, the searcher of the heart, knows fully our longings, yet he also understands the desires of the Spirit, because the Holy Spirit passionately pleads before God for us, his holy ones, in perfect harmony with God's plan and our destiny. So we are convinced that every detail of our lives is continually woven together to fit God's perfect plan of bringing good into our lives. For we are his lovers who have been called to fulfill his designed purpose. For he knew about us all before we were born, and he destined us from the beginning to share the likeness of his Son. This means the Son is the oldest among a vast family of brothers and sisters who will become just like him. So I was inspired to read that because we've all sinned. We've all made mistakes that we regret. We've all hurt other people. But God loves all of us. And if we just come to him, he will deliver us from our sufferings and will help guide us for anything that we're struggling with, whether it be depression from an abortion, whether it be anything that anyone in your audience is listening to right now. He's there if you just reach out to him. That's what happened with Dr. H and me. I'm just amazed how God has come into my life when I just turned to him for this. So with that said, thank you, everyone. And praise God. Praise Jesus.
Amen. Amen. All right. Amen. Well, this has been a real thrill for me, and I really appreciate your time, Dr. B, Dr. H, and Dr. M. You guys are very brave, and really, you are the role models that young ladies need. So I'm glad to post this. Friends, if you're listening, if you're still with us, please share this. Post it far and wide. Share it within your sphere of influence on social media. Get the word out. This is a battle between good and evil. It truly is spiritual warfare. And you've just heard from 3 warriors who are fully engaged in the battle. Ladies, thank you so very much for tuning in. Doctors, I should say. Doctors, thank you so much for joining me today. Very much appreciate it.
You're welcome. We're ladies too.
Thank
All right.
you so much.
All right. God bless. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in, friends. And for real news 24/7, visit us at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda and mockingbird mainstream media lies. We love you. God does too. Bye-bye.
This is going to be the biggest thing that has happened to our planet in 400 years in terms of economy and reset and society and the way we function with each other. Now, how would you control that?